Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pariraja Kacharya Ashto Tarasat Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Kota Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembly devotees. All glories to the assembly devotees. All glories to the assembly devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Cups.
Yeah, plenty of cups.
I need a drink.
Okay. Oh, you got
Good evening, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Would you like water or apple juice? Or
Water's good, please.
Sorry.
Oh, I do. I do have one. Which idea? Oh, you want actual tea? Do you want one?
Which one?
You can have that one.
Cheers. Okay.
What would you like to talk about tonight?
Krishna?
We have Krishna. One proposal is Krishna. The other proposals? Hmm?
Radharani.
Radharani is where last time you said.
Radharani,
Or
it's
you could do
Radha.
what you did last time.
Just open the book, yes. Let's just do that. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, text number 19. Yasya save samarambha kama sankalpavajita janagni dagda karmanam tamahu panditam buddha. Repeat. Yasya save samarambha
Yasya Sarve Samarambha.
Yasya sarve samarambha
Yasya Sarve Samarambha.
Kama sankalpavajitaha
Sankalpavajitaha.
Kama sankalpavajitaha
Sankalpavajitaha.
Jnanagni dagdha karmanam
Jnanagni dagdha karmanam.
Jnanagni dagdha karmanam
Jnanagni dagdha karmanam.
Tammahu panditam buddha
Tammahu panditam buddha.
Tammahu panditam buddha.
Tammahu panditam buddha.
Yasva sarve samarambha
Yasya Sarve Samarambha.
Kama sankalpa varjitaha
Kama sankalpavajitaha.
Janagni dagdha karmanam
Jnanagni dagdha karmanam.
Tam ahu panditam buddha
Tamahu panditam buddha. Yasya Sarve Samarambha. Yasya Sarve Samarambha. Kama sankalpavajitaha.
Kama sankalpavajitaha
Jnanagni dagdha karmanam.
Janagni dagdha karmanam
Tamahu panditam buddha.
Tamahu panditam buddha
Yasya, one whose, Save, all sorts of, Samarambha, in all attempts, Kama, desire for sense gratification, Sankalpa, determination, Vajitaha, devoid of
are devoid of
jnana,
jnana,
of perfect knowledge,
of perfect knowledge,
agni,
Agni,
fire,
fire,
dagdha,
dagdha,
being burned by,
being burned by,
karmanam,
karmanam,
the performer,
the performer,
tam,
tam,
him,
him,
ahu,
ahu,
declare,
declare,
panditam,
panditam,
learned,
learned,
buddha,
Buddha,
those who know.
those who know.
Translation. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every act is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker whose fruitive action is burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Purport. Only a person in full knowledge can understand the activities of a person in Krishna consciousness. Because the person in Krishna consciousness is devoid of all kinds of sense gratificatory propensities, it is to be understood that he has burned up the reactions of his work by perfect knowledge of his constitutional position as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is actually learned who has attained to such perfection of knowledge. Development of this knowledge of the eternal servitorship of the Lord is compared to fire. Such a fire, once kindled, can burn up all kinds of reactions to work. Umaginati minandasya gananjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam jena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manubhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Vishisakam Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharya Evishesha Sunyavadi Paschatyadeshi Bharati Kam Karoti Vacharam Pangum Langa Yukika Jatripatam Amvade Shri Guru So this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called Transcendental Knowledge. The word transcendental is a very interesting word. We have ascend, transcend, or ascend, descend, and transcend. So obviously we know ascend means to go up, descend means to go down, and transcend means actually to go across. So transcendental knowledge is knowledge which takes you across beyond the limits of material knowledge. And also it brings us to the understanding that we are also transcendental entities. We actually exist beyond matter. That's a very puzzling thing to a person who doesn't have proper knowledge. The prevailing philosophy in the world now, well, you can't say it's prevailing, because there are so many people who let's call it prevailing. I won't get into all of that right now. The prevailing philosophy is that life arises from the combination of material chemicals. In other words, life comes as an interaction of matter. And how that is supposed to have happened, nobody really knows, and nobody can really demonstrate. Actually, the opposite is being demonstrated. There was a famous French scientist called Louis Pasteur. He developed this process called pasteurization. And he did an experiment in which he had some living organisms in a fluid, in a bottle, and he killed them all and just left the fluid there, and then he sealed the bottle. And after some days it was found that all that was there was the fluid. Nothing was, it was inert. But as soon as he opened the bottle and opened it to the air, then organisms from the air came in and began to multiply in the fluid. The basic principle is that life comes from life, that we are living beings, and the first principle that Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita is that never was there a time when we did not exist. There is no beginning to our existence, there is no end to our existence. And Krishna also explains that about himself, that he is eternal, and we are also eternal beings. No beginning and no end. We are not created like this chair is created, or this building is created, or indeed this entire universe is created from material elements. But no amount of combining any kind of material elements together will give rise to a living being. Unless the living being is present there, then there is no life. So this body is in fact just dead matter. It's described as a bag of three elements. Mucus, bile and air, and the combination of these elements brings about so many other things within the body. But the body is a bag containing, when we look at, you break it down, you analyze it, blood, bone, organs, nerves, tissues, so on and so forth, all within skin, contained within the skin. But it has no life of its own. You ask the question, what is a living body and what is a dead body? What is the difference? Everything that was there materially before the moment of death is there after the moment of death, but something has gone. And also we see something subtle goes as well. The mind goes. There's no more activity of the mind, and there's no more activity of the intelligence, and there is no more activity of the self. That activity which makes us recognize the person that we are dealing with vanishes. And that is because that which is giving life to the body is itself alive, and the body is dead matter. So in terms of our topic tonight, this is very important to understand, because we're all involved in performing activities. We all have to act. Everybody has to do something. In fact, Krishna explains earlier in the 3rd chapter, you cannot refrain from doing something even for a moment. Everyone is always active, either in a waking state or a dreaming state, either within the mind or physically using the body. We're always active. And that is a quality of the soul. The soul is active. The soul is conscious. So there's three things there. We see eternally conscious active entity, alive, living being, an eternally conscious active living being. Somehow or another has come in contact with material elements. And in combination of material elements, we get bodies. One body after another, actually. That's explained also in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that for one who has been born, death is certain. And for one who has died, resultant rebirth is also certain. Because we never die. We never die. We are never born and we never die. It is only the material body which is born and dies. Just like changing clothes. That's another very nice verse in the second chapter where Krishna is talking about the nature of the soul. Where he says, just as one takes off old and useless clothes and puts on new ones, one simply gives up old and useless bodies and takes on new ones. Now this has been going on for us for a very long time. Our attraction to material life and our resultant involvement in material life, association with the material modes of nature, has brought about entanglement in the material world and very deep attachment to and very deep affection for the material world.
Just like that.
And a very, very strong desire to utilize material elements for our sense pleasure. The pleasure of our senses. Our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, and our skin. And as we see, this is a world of action and then reaction. Every action brings a reaction. Consequences come as you have sequences and then you have consequences. Sequences and consequences. And the consequences of a previous sequence we see actually turn out to be a sequence which gives rise to another consequence. Cause and effect. The effect of the previous cause becomes a cause of a further effect. And these things go on endlessly. Endless chains of cause and effect. Sequences and consequences. This is called the law of karma. Action and reaction. There must be a reaction for every action. And every reaction is setting up a situation that will be the cause of another reaction. And so on and so on and so on. And in this way, we become very much entangled in activities. And we are forced then to do activities, even against our will practically. Through association with the three modes of material nature, we are forced to act. And Krishna earlier, again, in the third chapter, he describes in a verse, Yagya tat kamanonyatra loko yam kama bandha tadatam kama kuntaya mukta sangha samacha. That work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu must be performed. Otherwise, one's work will bind one to the material world. So he says to Arjuna, so you perform your activities for his satisfaction, and this way you will remain unattached and free from bondage. So why do we want to be liberated? Why do we want liberation? Why do we understand, or how do we understand that we're in bondage? We go back to this original distinction. There is the soul and there is the body. The soul is a body. The soul doesn't actually have a body. The soul is a body, a spiritual form, a spiritual personality. But due to our attraction to the material world, we come from that world which is transcendental to matter. The spiritual world exists. And by the spiritual world, we don't mean the world of ghosts and hobgoblins and subtle entities within the material world. They are in themselves just other more subtle material forms. We mean that world beyond the realm of matter. That is actually the real world. This world is a facsimile of that. A facsimile, like you see, you go to Madame Tussauds, or Tussauds, how do you say that? Two swords. Well, that's what it means, does it? And you go and you see a facsimile of some famous person there. That person exists living somewhere else, but the facsimile has no life. So our real life is somewhere else. This is a facsimile of life. Because this life that we live in the material world is always temporary. And we are in the bondage of birth, old age, disease, and death. All of which occur in relationship to the material body. And because we've developed, through our attraction to material pleasure, we've developed a false ego. Because the first element of the material world is the false ego. So our contact with matter begins by us being covered by false ego. Actually, Krishna describes earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These 8 constitute my separated material energies. From the most subtle to the most gross, we become involved. False ego, intelligence, mind, ether, air, water, air, fire, water, and earth. So if you look at that as the constituents of the material world, it begins with false. False ego. A false sense of self in relationship to the combinations of material elements that make up the body in which we live and the mind with which we think and desire. So this covering of false ego has actually brought about a total forgetfulness of ourselves, of who we actually are. We actually have an eternal relationship with Krishna. Krishna is eternal and we are eternal. He is the supreme eternal being, upon whom all other eternal beings depend upon for everything. And there are unlimited eternal living beings. Actually, Krishna's creation has no beginning and no end. No beginning and no end in terms of time and also in terms of limit. Eternality, limitlessness, and inconceivability are 3 things which we have to accept in relationship to reality. Causeless causes of all causes. Krishna exists as the causeless cause of everything within an eternally limitless, inconceivable creation. But we have forgotten all these things. By the influence of the false ego, we forget these things. we forget our true identity. And because we forget our true identity, because we do not exist in isolation, we exist in relationship. If we forget ourselves, we also forget our relationship with Krishna. Our identity is defined by our relationship with Krishna. And that relationship with Krishna is transacted through loving exchanges. So all of this becomes forgotten when we enter the material world. And then we become entangled, and as it says, in bondage. We become, the word that describes the three modes of material nature is guna, and that literally means a rope. We become bound up by the ropes of the material modes of nature. And by our association with these modes, we are changing bodies, life after life after life, and endeavoring to enjoy life in whatever body we find ourselves. But whatever body we're in the material world, is a body in which we are in bondage. Because the happiness that we seek is actually also eternal. Happiness has to be eternal. We're eternal. If we want happiness, that happiness must be unending in order for it to be satisfied. We might extract some happiness through acquisition of material objects in the material world. But then the question remains, well, how long will I have proprietorship over these things? It's all temporary. So our bondage is that in our forgetfulness we misidentify ourselves with matter, we engage in fruitive work, and that is work which brings reactions upon us, either in this life or in lifetimes to come. So we are bound by birth, death, old age, and disease, and the repetition of this process. And this has been going on for a very long time. Therefore, we are called conditioned souls. We have become conditioned to accept. Srila Prabhupada gives a very nice example of how a man may be very ill for a long time, and he's bedridden, and he can't get out of the bed. For a very long time he's there. And in that situation he's passing stool, he's passing urine, he's having to eat there, he has to have his bath there, everything in the one place. And he comes to think, well, this is natural. This is the way things are. And he accepts, this is the way things are. But birth, old age, disease and death are not natural things for the soul. They are totally unnatural. Krishna consciousness, love of Krishna, relationship with Krishna, these things are the natural. These are natural. Srila Prabhupada uses a beautiful phrase where he says, this Krishna consciousness is not an artificial imposition on the mind. It is not an artificial imposition on the mind. It is natural. The natural state of all living beings is to be engaged in their eternal loving relationship with Krishna. Now, in that situation, there's also action and reaction. There's also sequence and consequence. But the sequences are all based upon the sequences of actions that we engage in on that level of existence are all based upon and coming from our love for Krishna, our desire to please Krishna. In the material world, all of our actions are coming from and based upon the desire to please ourselves. The result of activities which are performed out of a desire to please Krishna are always positive. They are always full of joy and happiness and give rise to further ideas, further desires to do something to satisfy Krishna. And Krishna always reciprocates in a loving fashion. Whereas the activities we perform in order to satisfy ourselves in the material world simply bring about the reaction of more and more entanglement in the repetition of birth, death, disease, and old age. So as the verse says here tonight, one is understood to be in full knowledge whose every act is devoid of desire for sense gratification. Act we must. We must act. So it is better to act in full knowledge rather than to act in ignorance or even partial knowledge. Full knowledge is that the purpose of our existence, the purpose of our eternal existence, is to actually give satisfaction to Krishna's senses. And that there is no satisfaction of the senses in the material world. Even Mick Jagger understood that. You can't get any satisfaction in the material world. That which you're looking for, that satisfaction that you were looking for, is described by Sutta Goswami in the 2nd chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which I cannot recommend to you highly enough as something to read regularly. The 2nd chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called The Contents of the Gita Summarized. And the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavatam, 1st canto of the Bhagavatam, is called Divinity and Divine Service, but it could equally be called Contents of the Bhagavatam Summarized. And Sutta Goswami is beginning to answer the 6 original questions coming from the sages at Naimisharanya. And the first question is, what is Dharma? And his reply is, Savai pumsam parodamo yato bhaktiya adhoksati ahoitaki apratiyata yaya atma suprasidati. That Param Dharma, the supreme occupation for all living entities, pumsam, all living entities, not just human beings, not just Hindus, not just those people who were born within the subcontinent of India, but pumsam, all living entities. Savai pumsam parodamo yato, that is bhakti, devotional service to the Supreme Lord Adhokshaja, who exists beyond the realm of our mundane sense perceptions. Ahoitaki apratihata means unmotivated and uninterrupted. Ahoitaki apratihata yayatma suprasidati. Prasidati means satisfaction. Suprasidati means very satisfied, completely satisfied. This devotional service to Krishna must become uninterrupted and unmotivated. And then there's a very interesting turn there. Why? To satisfy Krishna? No. To satisfy yourself. You can never become satisfied until you are engaged in uninterrupted and unmotivated devotional service to Krishna. Because that is what we are meant for. We give up that service to Krishna, we come to the material world, and servants we remain. But we remain the servants here of Maya. We remain the servants of temporary things. which never bring us satisfaction. And we work very hard for that. The Sanskrit word, another Sanskrit word for liberation is called apavaga. So you have pavaga, apavaga. Pavaga is made up of 5 syllables, the 5 first syllables of 5 Sanskrit words. Pa, pa, ba, bha, and ma. And these words are then explained to be that one comes into the material world and is overwhelmed by the material energy. Under the influence of the material energy in this overwhelmed situation, one is forced to work very, very hard. And in that situation, one becomes exhausted. And in that exhausted situation, one becomes full of fear. And in that situation, one dies. Now this is the path of bondage. But the path of liberation, the path of devotional service is called apavaga. Up means without these things. No overwhelmed by the material energy, no forced to work hard against the odds, no forced to become exhausted by that work, no fear and no death. So this is what is meant by full knowledge. And therefore, this is how one is able to become free from the demands of the mind to engage the senses in the objects of the senses. One becomes free to engage one's senses according to one's own desire. And then the second half of the verse explains, such a person's fruitive action is burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. The perfect knowledge, the perfect understanding of what I am and what I am meant to do. And then, within that, how I am meant to go about doing it, how to engage myself in the process of bhakti yoga, how to engage my mind, my intelligence, my senses, all in Krishna's service. And the result of that is, one's chain of fruitive reactions is destroyed. Because the process of bhakti involves a very important instruction from Krishna, and that is, you surrender to me and act according to my instructions, and I will destroy all of your sinful reactions. I will destroy all of your fruitive reactions that are due to come to you. They will be finished. Mokshisha, you'll become liberated from them. Free. Free from entanglement in the repetition of birth, death, disease, and old age. Free to do what is actually the deepest desire of your heart, and that is to serve Krishna. It's a gradual process, but it is a process which is effective from the moment that you begin to engage in it, because it brings with it a higher taste. We call this process bhakti yoga. It differs from all other forms of yoga in that, in those forms of yoga, as we read in the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that you have to go to a solitary place, you have to withdraw your senses from all engagements in outside things, and you have to fix your consciousness on the Lord within your heart, and you have to remain fixed in that state. Arjuna's response to that is, I can't do that. Arjuna's a very great warrior with very great mental power. But he says, it seems to me that it's easier to control the raging wind than it is to control the mind. The mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very, very strong. And Krishna says, yes, all this is true, but it is possible by constant practice and cultivation of detachment. And then he goes on to explain that practice and that process of detachment. And it is not to